Good morning, everyone, from wherever you guys are in the world. I see there's a lot of interesting names and faces from all over South Africa, some external to South Africa. So we'd like to welcome you to Nedscaper's first webinar around Copilot security. I'm going to hand over to Hans just to take you through an introduction of the Nedscaper team, our services, and who we are. And then once Hans has finished with the introduction, then we can get into the meat of the discussion. So with that, welcome, get seated. I hope you guys have all got a coffee and are sitting somewhere comfortable. So yeah, Hans, over to you.
Thank you, Alain. Welcome everybody. I think we have a good audience, quite a diverse audience. So welcome to part one of our Microsoft Copilot for Security webinar series. Many thanks for joining. My name is Hans Krol, and I'm one of the co-founders of Nedscaper, and I'm responsible for our South Africa business. My colleague from our strategy team here in South Africa, Alain, he will take you through most of the presentation in a little moment. Then we also have a couple of other colleagues on the call here. Tatum, she's part of our marketing team, and then I also see several other colleagues from our MXDR, cyber security operations team. Right. So AI obviously is the big buzzword at the moment, particularly within Microsoft. And I think it's really being presented as a sort of magical force that helps us to do things better, more efficient, smarter, and faster. And I think most of us probably have some experience with AI models such as ChatGPT in the past year or two. And yes, of course, the capabilities are truly remarkable. However, how would AI help us with our organization security operations in a sort of ever-changing, rapidly changing world? So today we are not demonstrating the product, Copilot for Security, but we will talk about the questions we need to ask from a business point of view. So we're not going technical really. So we take a business angle. And so the questions about applying this technology in our environments. Although we are not futurists, we try to anticipate how security is evolving and what is needed to stay ahead of malicious actors, who also more and more are supported by AI models. So it's not just us. So in part two of our series, which will happen on the 31st of May, we will go more in depth into the actual product itself, Copilot for Security. A couple of house rules. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we will handle them at the end of our session, just to ensure we have a flow in the presentation. We only have 1 hour. And yes, we can share the slides with you afterwards. All right, let's go to the agenda. Very briefly, so the introduction, that's me. The Evolving Cybersecurity Landscape, there will hand over to my colleague Alain. He will take you through that. Also the next item, why existing cybersecurity approaches fall short, so the gaps in the current approaches. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Copilot for Security product. What can it do actually in a security operations environment? And then the positioning. So why should you consider it? And then we'll end with a conclusion. Next slide, please. Yeah. So Nedscaper was selected by Microsoft in a sort of first wave to work closely with the security product development team of Microsoft on the Copilot product, Copilot for Security. And that allowed us to really work with the tool for roughly 6 months and get a very good insight into its capabilities and also the refinement to optimize the product. So there were about 47 partners worldwide that were part of that. We were part of the first wave. So yeah, I think it's been extremely helpful in getting a good understanding what we're working with. Next slide, please. All right, quickly about Nedscaper. So Nedscaper is a niche security player. We have offices in South Africa as well as in the Netherlands. Total headcount is around about 70 FTE. And yeah, sort of our main managed service is our 24/7 MXDR service powered by Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel. And however, we also provide 24/7 threat protection, vulnerability management, and threat intelligence services. So those are our managed services. As we believe that security operations is very effective, I think it's probably as important, maybe even more important, to build a very solid security posture first. Yeah, because of that, on a project basis, we assist with deployment work in the modern workplace space, Azure security, but also Microsoft Purview implementation and configuration, because we believe that data security is an instrumental part of an organization's security strategy. We're part of the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, MISA, which is a worldwide association for a select number of security partners, and gives us access to very valuable intelligence sources and information. Our MXDR solution is verified by Microsoft, kind of a stamp of approval. And our CTO is a member of the Security Advisory Council at Microsoft corporate level in Seattle. So that's a very selective group of partners, around about 11 partners worldwide. And that gives us a seat at the table where security product decisions are made and the latest information is being discussed. And then last but not least, Nedscaper holds all the advanced specializations under security, which are granted by Microsoft. All right, next slide, please. Our locations, I already briefly spoke about South Africa and the Netherlands. So over the last few years, I would say we have invested in building kind of a solid infrastructure to provide a reliable MXDR service. And we currently have security operations centers in Amsterdam, in Cape Town, and Johannesburg. And yeah, a professional team as well of end-to-end MXDR specialists. So your analysts, your engineers, managers, service delivery managers. So yeah, the full capability. Right, that takes us to the end of my part. So Alain, take it away. I think you're on mute, Alain.
I am on mute indeed. Rookie error. I think the interesting part is it's a Friday and I'm in my head operating on all cylinders, but very clearly not. So thanks for the introduction, Hans. I'm going to try and get my camera on here. I don't know why the camera isn't loaded. Let's see. Give me a second. If that doesn't work, we'll just do it this way. Oh, there we go. You should be able to see me nicely seated somewhere square in the middle of the page. Right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome from wherever you are accessing the event today. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you just to take you through our take on the evolving cybersecurity landscape. The idea behind today is we would like to take you through a thought piece. And the reason why we're referring to this as a thought piece is because when we sat down and tried to come up with a narrative for the conversation, we realized that there are multiple stakeholders in an organization from a cybersecurity enablement point of view. There's typically the business stakeholder, and then there's the technical folk. Now, in these webinars, quite often they seem to be swayed heavily towards the technical folk. And while that's great, the non-technical folk who potentially are the decision makers in terms of investing in advanced forms of technologies such as Copilot for security ultimately feel a little bit left out, because what inevitably happens is they have to sit in events and webinars that are geared towards technical people, which means they don't leave with a functional understanding or a deep level of understanding from a business value perspective of how these new life-changing technologies can really move the bottom line for them. So with that in mind, the idea behind today is really just to position Copilot for security around the interests of the business stakeholders. So as Hans said a little bit earlier, we're not going to take you through a technical demonstration of Copilot for security. We're just going to talk through some structural concerns that relate to cybersecurity as it currently stands, and we'll talk through some of the potential value propositions that are now coming to the conversation or the boardroom conversation all around the world. So that out the way, we can begin. So I want to start by really just framing the way cybersecurity looks currently. And you can go anywhere. Certainly, I'm connected, if I think about my own personal interests, to number of cybersecurity groups on WhatsApp, and I speak to cybersecurity professionals the world over. And the one thing that is very clear to me is that the world of cybersecurity is a realm that is in constant flux, filled with adaptation. And the problem here is within this world of flux and adaptation, we have lines between defense and attacks that blur with at alarming speed, right? And if you look at artificial intelligence, it has become the quintessential double-edged sword in this arena. And the reason I say this is because while it simultaneously revolutionizes how we defend as security practitioners our digital assets, it also serves to empower those who seek to undermine them, right? Which means while we as customers of AI technologies get to use this technology for the purpose of strengthening our capabilities, AI is also empowering the people, the bad actors that want to do damage to our systems. Now, in the traditional cybersecurity landscape, as if it wasn't already daunting enough with malicious actors constantly seeking new cracks in our environments, new vulnerabilities in our systems, AI has fundamentally tried, or it's trying to alter this landscape. And if you look at the abilities that it brings to the table, such as processing of vast data sets, learning, being able to adapt on the fly, we also see an unintended consequence is that AI gives attackers the same level of power to create, I suppose, a very high level of volume in this ever-evolving threat landscape. And this happens at incredible speeds, which is why it's becoming harder and harder for us to keep up. So the message that we need to accept is that we're no longer just dealing with human ingenuity amplified by technology. We're effectively staring down the barrel of autonomous AI field hacking, which is slightly scary, but there are some solutions to this problem. First solution to the problem is just to get the following message out of the way, which is that humans are not going anywhere, right? If we look at even the most sophisticated security tools, cybersecurity ultimately does hinge on the human element. If we take the human element out, we lose oversight. But hackers also understand this very, very well, and they try and go where the weakest link is, because humans are designed to err. We do that quite well. And the net effect of that is if you advance this psychological aspect of where the human fits into the conversation, AI effectively helps an attacker create highly personalized phishing scams, as an example. Social engineering attacks are amplified because of the data collection capabilities. And we can also look into something that's a little bit more, how can I say, esoteric in terms of approaches, which would be things that you guys are familiar with because you've seen it all over the world, and that is disinformation campaigns. So they can use machine learning to analyze our language patterns. They can analyze our online behavior. And effectively, this means tailoring ploys to expertly press our psychological buttons and then break down our defenses through manipulation instead of brute force, which would be the traditional attack method in years gone by. Certainly, if I look across my career spanning 20 years in this industry, you know, many, many years ago, it was as simple as just walking into an office, sticking a USB stick into the first machine that you find, and there you get your back door. It's a little bit less straightforward these days. We have to be a little smarter. And attackers have also, based on the fact that they have all the time and the resources to work out ways to do this, they know things that we don't. So using our psychological defenses, breaking that down through the smart levels of manipulation instead of that brute force methodology is ultimately how they win. And this is why we need to bring the worlds of AI and the human factor together to be successful. Now, it's not just the traditional threat vectors that AI transforms, because we're entering into an era where AI systems themselves have started to become targets. Now, deepfakes, you might be familiar with that, where AI manipulates audio and video content. They try or the intention there is to try and sow chaos and erode trust in the information we consume. So if you look at the two faces that you see on screen, I'll leave it to you to decide which of those two are real and which are generated by AI. It's very difficult to work through the nuance of the human face. So if you were to say to me that the two faces that you see on screen are real and we're not AI generated, how would we know without me as the creator of the pictures or the takers of the photo to stand there and tell you what the answer is? And in the world of adversarial AI, the point there is to trick existing AI defense systems, which allows malware to slip through or trigger false positives. And where you have lots and lots of false positives, first question is go to the tier one analysts. We have a lot of tier one analysts at Nedscaper, and one of the biggest challenges that they have to deal with on a daily basis is false positives. And the reason for this is it bogs them down and it keeps them focused on a deluge of phantom attacks. And it's kind of like keeping them busy, distracted, while you now have somebody that can try and effect an attack somewhere, which then slips through the cracks. So the challenge that we have is not only do we need to get smarter in terms of the use of AI, the attackers are getting smarter and the AI systems themselves are being attacked. And believe it or not, they're actually quite easy to attack because they take things as it's presented to them. AI systems do not err. That's a typically human function. So it's quite interesting to see how AI systems attacking other AI systems is becoming a way for attackers to confuse and distract for long enough to get a foothold in your organization. So to answer the question, who is real and who is not, they're both artificially intelligent generated pictures. I generated those two images using Midjourney, but they look damn real. The redhead certainly does. I suppose you could argue the lady on the left is probably more AI looking, but as natural and earthy and as farm girl as the girl on the right is, that face doesn't exist on Earth. She's artificially generated, right? So proves the point, what is real and what is not. Now, the next thing to mention here is that through this concept and this idea that we want to harness AI through the imperative of evolving defense, I must land the following message, which is the picture isn't entirely bleak, right? While it's true that the same power that fuels AI-enabled attacks effectively can be turned to our advantage, AI-powered intrusion detection systems are ultimately going to sift through immense volumes of network data to spot the anomalies that human eyes may miss, which is kind of that augment that we need to bridge those two worlds. And then if you extend that by looking into AI-based analytics for highlighting emerging attack patterns, it kind of allows us to anticipate and then proactively mitigate the risks. And then even in the realm of social engineering, for example, we can have AI-based tools that can analyze behavioral patterns, which then allows us to spot malicious accounts and help train users to recognize sophisticated scams. So if you take what I've just said into account and you just look at what the future looks like, harnessing the power of AI with the power of the human spirit and human ingenuity, it paints a little bit more of a broader picture, because one of the things that security has always been blamed for is being largely reactive, and we want to get into this proactive state. And when we get to, certainly if you look at some of the programs that Nedscaper has developed, like Mission 65, where it's our intent to try and help all the customers we work with to get beyond 65% of their Microsoft Secure score, there is this world through intelligent threat hunting methodologies where we can, for instance, move beyond that reactive security landscape into a proactive security cybersecurity landscape, and potentially even in some instances develop predictive capabilities. And that's kind of the holy grail for us, right? Moving from reactive through reactive into that predictive state. Now, the next thing that, and no cybersecurity presentation is going to be worth its salt without a little bit of doom and gloom. So I have to unfortunately land a bit of the negative here. But I will say that a very, how can I say, real world, i.e., not cutting corners, just calling a spade, right? What we're dealing with on a daily basis is literally tantamount to an arms race. It is fueled by AI that we're seeing, and it leaves us with 3 sobering realities, which I want to share with you. The first is, in the world of cybersecurity, there is absolutely no such thing as a silver bullet. There just isn't. Security is and must be a multi-layered, constantly evolving defense. And looking into the future, we need to have AI as this powerful tool to add into our capabilities to augment what we do. But AI as a tool on its own is not a singular solution. So that's the first thing. The second is that, as I said before, humans ultimately remain critical. So the most intelligent systems can still be fooled by a well-crafted lie or, for example, a social engineering trick. But if we have educated users and we have ethical AI design, this is going to remain central to the defense. So the important thing here, and this is something that rings true throughout the thread of my entire discussion today, is that humans ultimately remain super, super critical. And then the third thing is the need for vigilance. So the cybersecurity arms race has entered a phase of what we call hyper-evolution. And success for business and individuals collectively hinges on our adaptability and then an understanding that today's defenses ultimately may become tomorrow's vulnerabilities. And this is just the playbook, right? This is how it's worked for cybersecurity over the last 20 years, where one thing happens today, we solve for another problem, and then tomorrow something unearths as a result of that, something gets patched, and some new thing takes its place. And if we look in the application in the world of AI, it's basically started working to irreversibly alter that threat landscape. And then if I look at my role as a security practitioner at Nedscaper, my role with my customers is to be as transformative as AI has begun to transform the industry, and certainly organizations that are AI interested need to do exactly the same. So effectively what we're trying to say here is that this is a call for investment in advanced AI powered defense. It also expects us to develop a redoubled focus on user education within our organizations because, as I said, attackers are getting much, much smarter. And then it also calls for a constant process of learning, as well as this ever-changing adaptation that's required as technology continues its relentless march forward. And it's almost a bit, how can I say, it takes the wind out of your sails sometimes, because in the world of cybersecurity, your job is never done. It's not like an artist that's painting a picture that gets to finish the picture, stand back and marvel at what he or she has created. It's like you're playing whack-a-mole all the time, and where you solve one thing, there's 10 other things that pop up in its place. So it can be a little bit disconcerting, but I think many battles won equals a larger attempt at winning the war. Certainly, if you look at the way attackers have been brought down over the months, preceding December into April this year, there's been some large international takedowns. If you follow the global news on cybersecurity web boards and that, Interpol, the CIA, the FBI have been involved in some incredible takedowns just this year alone. So those small wins do add up to the whole, but ultimately our adaptation does need work. And I think this is where AI comes into the conversation. Right. Now, I did say that this never-ending game of whack-a-mole is kind of what it feels like, and we're all familiar with Patch Tuesday and all of these things. But another thing to think of is that while we have a dozen attacks that pop up, just when one vulnerability or another vulnerability has been dealt with, what we end up with is this world where we frantically respond, quite often very exhausted, with this lingering dread that we'll never quite catch all the attacks and we'll never really catch up. So the question to answer is, or rather the question to ask first, is why our existing cybersecurity approaches keep on falling short. So I want to take you through that over the next couple of slides. So the first one to talk about is this concept of alert overload. Now, modern security systems generate a relentless amount of alerts. Ask any tier 1 analyst, they'll tell you. This deluge overwhelms security teams who have an already struggling reality to deal with, because quite often SOC centers, security operations centers, or CSOCs, whatever you want to call them, they quite often are understaffed. In South Africa, certainly, it's incredibly difficult to staff a CSOC. And the reason why is the skill doesn't exist. So the skills that we do have, we tend to develop those skills once a person joins the business. So when somebody joins Nedscaper as a tier 1 analyst, they have the fundamental basics of what we need them to be, but we craft them and mold them into the things that we need to be, because 9 times out of 10, that skill doesn't exist in its pure form off the shelf. We have to mold that little ball of clay. And what this creates is we have desperate analysts that just cannot sift through the noise fast enough. They do and can miss critical alerts. It's a common side effect of analysts the world over. It's not just a Nedscaper problem. And when they miss critical threats that are buried in the data, obviously, and that creates a problem. So we have to be smart in terms of the way we apply technology and processes to be able to solve for this problem. So you might be familiar with the shepherd boy that kept on crying wolf, and eventually nobody listens to them anymore. So over time, when there's such a large deluge of data, we can often become numb to the alarms in the system, and then true compromise can and does get buried under an avalanche of false positives. So this is why a CSOC like Nedscaper is quite unique, because we have our own intellectual property, we have our own capabilities in terms of the way we build things, and every SOC in the world has got their own flavor of IP that they do, just to circumvent this deluge of alerts and to work through a management process of making sure that at a process level, everybody has the ability to answer questions. Now, at a glance, this is where AI comes into the picture, because this alert overload is potentially something that we can solve for, because we now use the power of natural language to ask questions of the technology based on an environment, and then getting straightforward English responses from which to enter into forensic investigations to confirm whether systems are in fact experiencing false positives or accurate alerting. The other thing we need to get away from is this world of siloed security products. Now, this is also just a function of the way the cybersecurity industry has been built. Over the years, we've invested in a patchwork of specialized security tools. Firewalls are probably the most famous. Endpoint protection fits into that conversation. Intrusion detection, IDS or IPS systems are also famous for that. The list goes on. It's quite an extensive list. And each of those pieces of technology might be top-notch in terms of the function that they provide, but traditionally the way they have been deployed is in isolation. So when you have isolated security products, you've got a lack of interconnectedness, and what that means is you have alert fatigue as a potential that comes from all of these devices, because they don't know about each other and they don't necessarily know what each other is doing to mitigate risks. So the challenge that we have is, in Afrikaans, we've got this thing we call place that plak, which is sticking a plaster to a solution. And the narrative has always been add another layer, add another something onto the machinery that we use to solve for cybersecurity. But the important thing here in terms of siloed security products is the lack of intercommunication, which gives us then a cohesive view of our environment. And this creates a dangerous level of blind spots, because attackers You might have nice, neat classifications for things in your environment, but attackers don't adhere to neat categories. They don't care. They'll find the seam where one system's protection fades and the next hasn't quite taken over. And if that's exposed and you're unaware of it, they will exploit it, which means you're left in this world of siloed security products thinking you were safe, but actually you were far from it just because there was one sliver of a gap that somebody manipulated and used it to their advantage. So that leads me to the next thing, which is this world of reactive measures. So traditional cybersecurity has been inherently reactive. And the reason for this is we build defenses based on yesterday's attack patterns. And then the cybersecurity criminals, they're quite smart. They might be state-sponsored attackers and they've got lots of money. So they can spend the time to become relentlessly innovative, and their tactics continue to evolve. And then by the time we write a signature to block the last exploit, they're already onto the next zero-day vulnerability, and then they are exploiting weaknesses that nobody even knew existed, right? Because they have time. We have to run businesses. They can sit in their data centers or wherever they sit. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of the documentaries available globally where you get these hackers for hire. They're well-ordered businesses. They've got managing directors. They've got department heads. They've got they're structured like a business. They are hackers for hire. They sit in a call center and they do the work that me and you do on a daily basis. Just we're trying to protect against them and they're trying to kind of exploit the weaknesses. So this is the world that we're working with. And ultimately, these reactive measures are one of the things that we need to get away from. Like I said earlier, we need to shift into that world of predictive/proactive. The best case for now for most organizations, bearing in mind the cost associated to moving from reactive into proactive and then beyond proactive into predictive, there is a cost associated to this. This is just unfortunately the way the world works. But reactive is definitely not a good place to be. Now, I've said this and I'll say it again. We can't continue down this road. We have to endure and entertain a paradigm shift from this reactive world into proactive. But another way to think of this, and maybe just to not harbor on the point a little bit too much, is let's say it in a different way. Let's call it moving from isolated to holistic, which means instead of looking at each little component of your organization from a cybersecurity perspective, let's expand our view, zoom out, and see how we can perceive our organization from a holistic point of view when it comes to cybersecurity. So there's three things here that I want to mention that helps kind of refocus our efforts in terms of the approach. Obviously, AI can help us address the issue, but the challenge there is that we need help in integrating all of this, and certainly looking at things like zero trust and assume breach. These three things together are going to help us get sharp on the issue. So I want to touch on these very quickly. All right. So the first one is just this idea that AI can come to the rescue, help us process alerts faster, and help us, through the power of human oversight, be a lot more capable. And it's a conversation piece worth carrying into the boardroom. And I say this because, if you look at AI, machine learning, neural networks, all of these things, these ultimately do hold promise for assisting with the alert deluge problem that I spoke about earlier. If we consider the algorithms that are built into this technology, these algorithms are super smart, which means they can spot patterns invisible to the human eye. And within these patterns, it's going to allow the surfacing of anomalies, which is likely to represent real danger in an organization. However, I did say that AI isn't a silver bullet. So if you take the human security analysts into the conversation, they must remain in the loop because they're ultimately the context machinery that are going to help preventing systems from focusing on the wrong threats. So you bring the two worlds together, and then AI effectively becomes the dude on the cape with a cape that you see on screen. The second one I wanted to talk to in terms of changing our approach is integration. So I spoke about this earlier. if we look at a true defensive network, we have to dissolve those silos. Security systems have to communicate with each other, and they have to share their threat intelligence, and this has to happen in real time. And the reason we want to do this is because it creates a single source of truth, and that's moving to this holistic world that I spoke about a few minutes ago. We want that unified, ever-updating view of an entire technological environment, and the outcome of this is that we get blind spot removal. Those blind spots vanish when we go through integration. So we have to look at Copilot for security as this world of applying an AI layer that's going to give you oversight through the technological gaps that you have from a cyber defense perspective in your organization, bypassing or transcending those silos that we have built over the years, moving into this world of real-time intelligence. Okay, now you guys might be familiar with the zero trust argument. You might be familiar with when, not if, and you'll definitely be familiar with this catch line that has permeated throughout the entire cybersecurity industry, which is assume breach. So this is just a continuation of that, because ultimately what we're saying is we want to bring those two worlds together. Because even with improved detection, we still have to further this idea of assume breach mentality. So we've been talking about this for quite a couple of years now, but many enterprises ultimately don't have the capabilities to deliver zero trust back to the business. And the reason for this is twofold. The first reason is it's very, very complex, because the levels to which you can go to deploy zero trust in an organization can be quite complex. And the second thing is it's very expensive. So from a skill set perspective, it's always an outsource, which means there's always a partner that's coming into an enterprise business to deliver a project around zero trust. And nobody really knows the depth to which this needs to go. So those two things combined make zero trust very, very difficult to deploy in the enterprise. And by zooming out, we kind of acknowledge that at some point, an attacker will likely slip through. It happens, right? And when we build security from the inside out, zero trust kind of attempts to enforce strict authentication and access controls. And the net effect of that is we have a limited blast radius. We contain the blast radius if one part of a system does fail, which is the purpose of zero trust. Now, by extension, the other thing that's gleamingly obvious, and this is something we also need to accept about cybersecurity, is that it's not a solvable puzzle, right? It's an ongoing arms race, as I mentioned earlier. But by ditching our outdated approaches that ultimately fail us consistently, we can regain the upper hand. So we need to be more smart, we need to be more integrated, we need to be more proactive. And if we expect our digital fortresses to withstand the evolving onslaught, that adaptation through novel approaches like using Copilot for security as the new way of doing business and the new way of managing cybersecurity is going to help us gain that upper hand. So I want to get you a little bit more familiar with Copilot for security specifically. So with the functional parts of the conversation out the way, let's talk about the positioning. So cybersecurity has become both a technological arms race and a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Now, the attackers, they become bolder because their tools have become more sophisticated, and the volume of threats aimed at organizations of just about any size relentlessly continues to escalate, right? I just want to plug in my battery. It looks like my laptop has decided to go flat. Just give me a second here. There we go. Problem solved. Now, in the volatile landscape that cybersecurity has become, Microsoft Security Copilot or Copilot for Security emerges as the game changer. And this is the point, right? We want to be able to harness the power of AI to give security teams a much needed edge. That's really what we want to try and achieve. So in terms of positioning Copilot for security, it's this layer of truth that gives you access to understanding what the inherent value of your telemetry is, but through the power of natural language, which is, I guess, in addition to that much needed change as far as our approach is concerned. The second thing that's worth talking about in terms of the value proposition for Copilot for Security is this idea of centralized knowledge as power. So we know that the cybersecurity world is awash with tools, dashboards, alerts, and all these things. But a fragmented cybersecurity landscape means that vital information is ultimately very likely in an organization today to be scattered and overlooked. So what Copilot attempts to do is to turn this weakness into a strength by centralizing knowledge from across the organization, across the tools and the infrastructure that exists there. And then if you think about it from the perspective of a simple AI assistant that tirelessly combs through vast data streams and then connects the dots for you, which then surface crucial insights that may have been missed by a human analyst. And I mean, if I look at my mobile phone, I've been speaking to my mobile phone for years. There's not a day that goes by where I don't say, hey, Google, at least 5 or 6 times because I got a question. And as I said it, my phone woke up. How clever. We all familiar with AI assistants, right? Sometimes my phone is lying somewhere in the house and I can't find the bloody thing. And then I just say, hey, Google, where are you? And towards the sound. I've found many times just by doing that. Very rudimentary example, but by extension, Copilot for Security is that. It's an AI assistant that is trained within the realm of cybersecurity for providing those crucial insights that may have been missed by a human analyst. And the idea here is over time, the centralized knowledge base then becomes the foundation upon which Copilot's other capabilities will become built. Right. Now let's talk about the proactive defense. So Security Copilot doesn't just wait for trouble to find you, right? It's about getting ahead of the curve because we want to draw patterns from the centralized knowledge that I just referred to so that AI can identify potential vulnerabilities and the emerging threats that happen with an incredible amount of speeds, as we now know. And this isn't about vague protection either, because the AI can identify, things like, and this is off the back of actionable insights, things like potential phishing campaigns in the making, unpatched systems ripe for exploitation, maybe there's unusual login attempts that warrant investigation, whatever the case might be, shifting from that reactive to that proactive defense that I've been talking about through this presentation, through that centralized knowledge base that I've spoken about in a slide before. This is now where the proactive defense posture starts to become real. And it allows security teams to then neutralize attacks before they cause widespread damage in the organization. So this is kind of the rubber hitting the ground in terms of Copilot for Security doing the work that it does. Now, the next thing I want to share with you is, remember I said that we want to get away from this layered approach to cybersecurity. And this is why I've labeled this slide built in as opposed to bolted on. And what I was trying to allude to earlier is that the complexity of cybersecurity is often its own enemy, right? It's so complicated and it has become so complicated that it's often very, very difficult to manage. Too many systems to manage and disparate tools ultimately slows down decision making and responses in most organizations. So we had to develop and we had to accept that there is a need for a radically different approach. And I think this is what Microsoft is trying to achieve through Copilot for Security. So by built into a Microsoft security ecosystem, it leverages the data and the insights that you already have at your fingertips. You're already using M365. You're already using the E5 security suite. You're already using a lot of these technologies. So instead of adding another layer, Copilot amplifies that existing security investment that you as a customer might have. And then through those deep levels of integration, it fosters this layer of efficiency, streamlined workflows, and collaboration with AI as your ever vigilant partner. And I think that world, together with those traditional models, slowly pulls us out of the darkness into the light in terms of trying to gain the upper hand, or regain the upper hand rather, as far as what we're trying to do. So I want to quickly talk about the future face of cyber defense. So this is a big statement that we're making, but I think the important thing to note here is this is not a marketing discussion, right? So this is not slides that have come from Microsoft's marketing division to try and press upon you this new flashy thing that you need to buy. It's trying to impress upon you the idea that the world has changed. It's not the world is changing. The world has changed, and it's happened under our very noses, right? And I will be the first to say that Copilot for Security is not some magical solution that'll banish all cyber threats. However, it does offer a compelling vision of the future of cyber defense. We have no choice. We have to be smart in terms of what we're doing, in terms of the technologies that we use. So by bringing traditional approaches together with the AI approach, we get sharper as the attackers get sharper. Now, in the world that we live in, obviously human expertise is quite scarce, and the threat landscape evolves at lightning speed. Basically, what I'm trying to say is AI in this context is no longer a luxury. It has become a necessity, and Copilot for Security ultimately represents a new breed of AI assistant. So if there's anything that you walk away with from this presentation today, it's this idea that Copilot for Security is an AI assistant, right? It's here to help you be sharper in terms of your ability to deploy and make sense of systems within your environment. Another adaptation that it brings to the conversation is the fact that Copilot seeks to empower security professionals instead of seeking to replace them. And through that centralized knowledge, it obviously helps teams work a lot more proactively and integrate seamlessly into the systems for that holistic cybersecurity view that I spoke about earlier. And then looking into the future, certainly as AI continues to mature, no doubt Microsoft's Copilot for Security and its capabilities will undoubtedly expand. And then by extension, we will eventually have the ability to automatically generate remediation steps, orchestrate complex responses in our environments from a CSOC perspective, and we can spar back and forth with analysts through the use of that technology to refine the techniques that lie upon the horizon. So one thing is clear. The era of AI-powered cybersecurity has arrived, and I can quite confidently say that Microsoft is leading the charge in this respect. So before we wrap up, I've got 2 slides left, and then I think we can switch over to some Q&A if there are any questions. I just want to cover a very quick summary. The first thing I want to say in terms of summarizing what we've spoken about over the last hour is the fact that we all collectively have access to a revolutionary force for good, which is why I put it bright and bold in the middle of the screen. AI is without a doubt a revolutionary force in cybersecurity. It dramatically increases both threats and our ability to combat them. But we also know that attackers use AI and machine learning to increase the speed and ultimately the precision and the volume of the assaults that they bring into the organization. They can also manipulate our behavior, as we've seen, and they can even attack other AI-based defenses themselves. And then what that leaves us with is the need to survive. So to survive, we have to harness AI to strengthen our own protection, evolving our own defenses, just as fast as what the threats seem to change. Now, there's a couple of things that are worth noting here. The first is there's challenges and imperatives in this conversation that are important to walk away from a conversation like today with. And it's this. Traditional cybersecurity is overwhelmed. We know this. Security teams are flooded with alerts, their tools don't integrate, and they're always reacting to the last attack rather than anticipating the next. So there's 2 things, or actually 3 things that we need. The first is AI assistant to intelligently process alerts and recognize human patterns that the humans may miss. The second is complete integration of those security solutions to stop threats slipping through the cracks. And then the third is this new mindset that I spoke about earlier. We have to assume that intrusions will occur, and we need to bolster our internal defenses with zero trust as an adaptation to our approach. So that's challenges and imperatives. The next thing that's also important to note, and this is another thing I want to leave you with, is the fact that AI is not here to replace human expertise, right? I've said this and I've dotted this through the discussion today several times, and it was not by accident. It was quite intentional. I think a lot of people have a natural fear of technologies that are designed to potentially replace them. And certainly in a production line, if you're a vehicle manufacturer and you have been the guy that puts the indicators on the car for the last 5 years, out comes a robot, the robot replaces you, boom, you don't have a job. I understand how those things can be fearful for people, but in the world of cybersecurity, no robot can err like a human can, right? So it's vital to understand that Copilot for security isn't designed to replace security professionals, not at all. And it's all in the name, Copilot, not pilot. You are the pilot. It is the co-pilot. So there's two things I want to talk about here. Number one is the fact that it empowers analysts. It speeds up and improves an analyst's work. It's going to help them find threats that they might miss and frees them up from the drudgery of sifting through mountains of false alarms. And the second is it also helps us improve a lot faster through the democratization of security, because Copilot can help less experienced teams with a level of protection which is normally reserved for those with a much more sophisticated cybersecurity operation. And that's the power of what Microsoft tries to achieve. Now, if you look at the back of any Microsoft employee's access badge into the building, there's a statement there that says to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And the way Microsoft does this is through democratization of information technology. So bringing this democratization conversation into the cybersecurity realm is a pretty smart move, because where you have junior tier 1 analysts that can now use the natural power of language to solve for some of the challenge that they have when they are investigating false positives, when they need to escalate into a tier 2 for forensic investigation, it ultimately just helps us accentuate our capabilities, and the exponential growth from a speed to functional point of view is amplified. So that's it. I want to quickly just close on a conclusion by saying that the cybersecurity landscape is changing faster than ever. It's impossibly difficult to keep up. And organizations that are very quick to adopt potent AI tools like Microsoft's Copilot for security, they are the ones that are best positioned to survive and even thrive in the face of these evolving threats. And it's really a technology that offers a significant competitive edge. So if you are in any level of doubt, please connect with your Nedscaper team, reach out to us. We will bring the Microsoft team into the conversation. We will spend time with you to help you understand what CSOC services are really about. And that is all I have for you today. So let's quickly talk about what comes next. So that was part 1 of the 2-part webinar series. Coming up in part 2 of the Copilot for security webinar at the end of May, 31st of May, I will touch on going through the past to future, which is really just this move from signature-based defenses into behavioral analytics, the new kind of indicators for that. And speaking how AI-powered cyber defense is the next layer of capability that we integrate into our cybersecurity systems for that holistic view. Then I will touch on some of the business value drivers around Copilot for security, and then we'll talk about that all-important human AI calibration. So I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. I see there's a couple of questions, so I will answer that. So Keith, you asked how can we register for session 2? We will create that event in the calendar, and then everybody that registered for today will receive an invitation to that event, and then you can join on the day. So I think that answers your question. Eric, you asked a similar question, how do we get invitation for second part? So don't stress, we've got your email address as part of your registration. So once the event is created for the 31st of May, we'll send out the invite. So we've got a few minutes left, 3 or 4 minutes left. If there are any questions that anybody has asked or has in mind rather, please feel free to pop them into the chat window. I see Zachary asked a question a few minutes ago about a replay. Yes, indeed, there will be a replay. Don't stress, Zachary will send you the recording. As soon as this event is concluded, the recording will be automatically available. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Teams actually intelligently sends you a message or an email to say that the recording is available. I think that's automated. But we'll definitely make sure that everybody gets a copy of the recording. Let's see. I see some more questions in the chat window. Oh, some hand claps from Eric. Thanks, my man. So I think if there's no further questions, I think we can conclude for today. So from me personally, I would like to thank you for your attention on a Friday. I realize I was standing between you and your weekend. So I appreciate your focus on a Friday morning talking about a really topical bit of technology that is likely to permeate the way we do cybersecurity over the next couple of months into the future. So with that, have yourselves a great Friday. Heading into the weekend, be safe, whatever you get to, and we look forward to hosting you in part 2 coming at the end of May.